The cold seared through my thin nightshirt, a stark contrast to the burning in my side. I pressed a hand against the wound, a wet warmth blooming between my fingers, slick and coppery. The metallic tang filled my nostrils, sharp, unmistakable. 2 a.m. The house was silent save for my ragged breathing, each inhale a shallow, desperate gasp. My stepbrother, Mark, stood over me, the knife glinting dully in the sliver of moonlight piercing the kitchen window. His eyes, usually a flat, uninteresting brown, held a manic glint, wide and unblinking. "What did you do?" My voice was a reedy whisper, barely audible even to myself. Blood pulsed from the gash, staining the pale linoleum. He didn't answer. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face, not a genuine smile of amusement, but a stretched, unnatural contortion of his lips. He simply watched me, the knife still clutched in his hand, droplets of my life's fluid clinging to the blade. I stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the counter, my legs threatening to give out. The world tilted. I called for help, a desperate, guttural cry that ripped from my throat. "Mom! Dad!" Footsteps thumped on the stairs, heavy and hurried. Hope surged, a fleeting, foolish thing. They would see. They would understand. They would protect me. My mother, Sarah, appeared first, her face a mask of sleepy annoyance until her gaze landed on me. Then Mark, then the knife, then the spreading crimson on the floor. Her eyes widened, but not in horror. A flicker of something else, disbelief, perhaps, or even a strange, almost amused confusion, crossed her features. My stepfather, Richard, lumbered in behind her, his usual gruff expression softening into something unreadable. "Phoebe, what in God's name happened here?" Richard's voice rumbled, but he didn't move towards me. He didn't move towards Mark. He just stood there, observing like a spectator at a play. "Mark stabbed me," I choked out, pointing a trembling finger at him, the effort sending a fresh wave of pain through my side. "He stabbed me." Sarah let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. It wasn't a sympathetic sound, not a sound of distress. It was a scoff, almost. "Phoebe, don't be so dramatic. He probably just bumped you with a butter knife. Look at you, making such a fuss." My jaw dropped. The pain, the fear, the shock, they all coalesced into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "A butter knife?" I ripped my hand away from the wound, exposing the deep, ragged slice, still weeping. "This isn't a butter knife, Mom. This is a real knife. He meant to hurt me." Richard finally stepped forward, not to me but to Mark. He gently took the knife from his son's hand. Mark offered no resistance, his eyes still fixed on me with that vacant, unsettling smile. Richard examined the blade, then the wound. His brow furrowed, a slight grimace on his lips. "Well, it's not that deep, Phoebe." Richard's voice was dismissive, almost annoyed. "Just a scratch. You're always so over the top." "A scratch?" My vision blurred at the edges. I could feel the warmth of the blood soaking through my nightshirt, clinging to my skin. I could feel the faint tremor in my body, the cold sweat beating on my forehead. "I'm bleeding everywhere. I need a hospital." Sarah sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "Oh, for heaven's sake. It's 2 a.m. We'll just put a bandage on it. You'll be fine." "Mark, what were you even doing with a knife at this hour?" Mark shrugged, his smile widening. "Phoebe was making noise. I told her to be quiet. She wouldn't." My mother's head tilted, a strange, almost fond look in her eyes as she regarded her son. "See, Phoebe? You provoked him. He's sensitive to noise. You know that." I stared at them, my parents, the 2 people who were supposed to protect me, to love me unconditionally. Their faces were devoid of concern, devoid of empathy. They genuinely believed I was exaggerating, that I had somehow deserved this. The blood dripped from my fingers, forming a small, dark puddle on the floor. "I called the police," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "I'm calling the police." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare, Phoebe. You'll just cause trouble. It's a family matter. We'll handle it." I ignored her, fumbling for my phone in my pocket. My fingers were slick with blood, making the screen difficult to navigate. My body screamed in protest, but a new, fierce resolve hardened my spine. They wouldn't protect me, but I would protect myself. "You're going to regret this, Phoebe," Richard warned, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to bring shame on this family." "I don't care," I gasped, finally dialing 911. My voice cracked as I relayed the information, the pain making it hard to speak coherently. "My stepbrother, he stabbed me. I'm bleeding." The dispatcher's calm, professional voice was a lifeline in the swirling chaos. "Stay on the line, ma'am. Help is on the way." Sarah watched me, her face contorted into an expression of pure fury. She didn't yell, didn't scream. Her anger was cold, precise, like a surgeon's blade. "You are dead to me, Phoebe. You hear me? Dead." The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Mark, still smiling, began to hum a tuneless melody, swaying slightly. Richard paced, his jaw tight. Sarah simply stood there, her eyes fixed on me, radiating a hatred so potent it felt like a physical blow. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, paramedics, and questions. They took me to the hospital, stitched up the wound, and administered a tetanus shot. The police took statements, their faces grim. My parents arrived later, not to comfort me, but to spin a story, to minimize, to deflect. "It was an accident, officer," Sarah insisted, her voice dripping with false concern. Phoebe startled Mark. He was just cutting a late-night snack. She tripped. "It was a terrible misunderstanding. Mark is autistic, you see," Richard added, his voice carefully modulated. "He has sensory issues. Phoebe knows this. She should have been more careful." The officer, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened patiently. She then looked at me. "Is that what happened, miss?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No. He told me to be quiet." I didn't respond fast enough. He stabbed me." He smiled. My parents stood there, their faces carefully blank, refusing to meet my gaze. The charges were filed. Assault with a deadly weapon. My stepbrother, Mark, was arrested. The news tore through our small town like wildfire. Neighbors whispered. Friends looked away. My parents, true to their word, cut me off. They saw me as the villain, the one who had betrayed the family, who had ruined Mark's life. The weeks leading up to the trial were agonizing. I lived in a state of constant anxiety, my wound a dull throb, a physical reminder of their betrayal. My own mother, the woman who had given birth to me, refused to speak to me, refused to acknowledge my pain. She and Richard spent every waking moment preparing Mark's defense, portraying him as a victim of my provocation, a special needs child misunderstood and unfairly targeted. My friends, bless them, rallied around me. My best friend, Chloe, brought me food, sat with me for hours, and listened to my endless rehashing of that night. "They're monsters, Phoebe," she'd say, her voice tight with anger. "Your mother. I just don't understand." "I don't understand either," I'd whisper, clutching a mug of tea, the warmth doing little to thaw the ice in my chest. "I just don't." The trial began. The courtroom was packed. My parents sat on one side, Mark between them, looking bewildered, occasionally humming. I sat on the other, alone, except for Chloe, who insisted on being there. The prosecution laid out their case, presenting the evidence. My wound, the police report, my testimony. I recounted the events of that night, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I described Mark's unsettling smile, my parents' callous disregard. Then came the defense. My parents' lawyer, a slick, expensive man named Mr. Harrington, painted a picture of Mark as a fragile, misunderstood individual with severe autism, prone to accidental outbursts when overstimulated. He argued that I, Phoebe, had been negligent, that I had intentionally provoked Mark, knowing his sensitivities. "You're aware, aren't you, Miss Clark, that your stepbrother Mark has a diagnosis of severe autism?" Mr. Harrington's voice was smooth, condescending. "Yes, I am," I replied, my voice firm. "And you are aware that loud noises, sudden movements, and unexpected interactions can cause him distress and lead to involuntary reactions?" "I am aware of his sensitivities, yes." But he wasn't distressed. He was just annoyed. And he used a large kitchen knife, not a butter knife. Mr. Harrington scoffed. "Annoyed, you say? And you believe this annoyance justifies his intentional use of a weapon? Or perhaps, Miss Clark, you are exaggerating the severity of his condition to paint him in a more malicious light?" My blood boiled. He was twisting everything, making me sound like a liar, a manipulator. "He stabbed me," I stated, my voice rising. "He stabbed me, and my parents laughed." A ripple went through the courtroom. Sarah shot me a venomous look. Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Objection," Mr. Harrington shouted. "Irrelevant and inflammatory." "Sustained," the judge said, her voice calm and authoritative. "Miss Clark, please stick to the facts." The most damning moment came when my mother, Sarah, took the stand. She swore under oath that Mark was a gentle soul, that he wouldn't hurt a fly. She claimed I had a history of being dramatic, of seeking attention, of fabricating stories. "Phoebe has always been imaginative," she said, her eyes welling up with carefully rehearsed tears. "She's always made things out to be worse than they are. This was an accident, a tragic accident, My poor Mark. He's just a child. She never once looked at me. Never once acknowledged the pain she had inflicted, the betrayal that had ripped our family apart. She spoke of Mark's future, his potential, how this incident would ruin him. She spoke of my actions, my provocations, my selfishness. The jury listened, their faces impassive. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. They believed her. They believed them. How could they not? My own mother, crying on the stand, painting me as the villain. Then the prosecution called their final witness. Dr. Aris, a renowned forensic psychologist specializing in autism spectrum disorders. Dr. Aris had interviewed Mark extensively, reviewed his medical history, and observed him in various settings. Dr. Aris, can you tell us your assessment of Mark's cognitive and emotional state on the night of the incident? The prosecutor asked. Dr. Aris, a woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor, adjusted her glasses. Based on my comprehensive evaluation, while Mark does indeed have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, it does not, in this specific instance, fully explain or excuse his actions. A murmur went through the courtroom. Sarah gasped a small, choked sound. Can you elaborate? Yes. Mark's autism presents primarily as social communication deficits and repetitive behaviors. He can experience sensory sensitivities, certainly. However, his cognitive function is within the average range. He understands cause and effect. He understands that a knife is a dangerous object. He also exhibited no signs of a meltdown or extreme distress prior to the incident, according to his own statements and the plaintiff's testimony. But my parents claimed he was overstimulated by noise, the prosecutor pressed. Dr. Aris shook her head gently. While noise can be a trigger for some individuals with ASD, Mark's specific profile does not indicate an extreme aversion to typical household noises. More importantly, his verbal response to Phoebe. I told her to be quiet. She wouldn't. Suggests a conscious decision-making process, not an involuntary, reflexive action driven by overwhelming sensory input. He was expressing frustration, not experiencing a meltdown. She continued, her voice clear and unwavering. Furthermore, his lack of immediate remorse or distress after the event, and his subsequent description of the event, are not typical of an accidental injury caused by an autistic individual in distress. His continued smile, as described by the plaintiff, coupled with his calm demeanor, indicates a detachment, perhaps a lack of empathy, but not an inability to understand the consequences of his actions. He knew what he was doing. He intended to cause harm. The courtroom was utterly silent. My mother's face was ashen. Richard looked like he'd been struck. Mark, for the first time, stopped humming. He looked at Dr. Aris, then at his parents, a flicker of something resembling confusion, perhaps even fear in his eyes. The closing arguments were delivered. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity, but was, in reality, only a few hours. I sat there, my heart pounding, my hands clammy, bracing myself for the worst. When the verdict finally came, the judge's voice cut through the tension like a knife. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Davies, guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Sarah let out a strangled cry, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard slumped in his seat, his face buried in his hands. Mark stared blankly ahead, his smile gone. The judge continued, her voice resonating with gravity. Given the severity of the offense, the clear intent to cause harm, and the testimony presented, I am sentencing Mark Davies to 5 years in a specialized correctional facility designed to address the needs of individuals with his diagnosis, with mandatory therapy and rehabilitation. Upon release, he will be subject to strict probation. Then, she looked directly at my parents. And to the parents of the victim, Sarah Clark and Richard Davies. Your blatant disregard for your daughter's safety, your attempts to obstruct justice, and your deliberate fabrication of facts under oath are deeply disturbing. While you cannot be charged in this case, your actions will not go unnoticed. I urge you to reflect on the profound damage you have inflicted on your family. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents, who had laughed at my pain, who had dismissed my suffering, were utterly silenced. Their faces were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a dawning comprehension of the consequences of their actions. They had lost. They had truly lost. I stood up, my legs trembling, but a strange, exhilarating lightness filled my chest. Chloe rushed to my side, hugging me tightly. I looked at my mother, her face streaked with tears, her eyes finally, truly meeting mine. There was no more hatred, no more anger, just a vacant, hollow despair. I had been stabbed, betrayed, and discarded. But in that moment, as the judge's verdict echoed through the courtroom, I understood something profound. They thought they could silence me, make me disappear. But the truth, ugly and painful as it was, had a voice of its own. It had spoken, and it had finally set me free.